So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this celebration of life of Bill Spriggs and Rodney Andrews. As we usually do in these settings, we share a little bit of an anecdote about the people who have left us and our personal experiences with them. And I think the first thing I would say about both Bill and Rodney is that I wish I had had more conversations and interactions with them. So in the case of Bill, of course, being in the HBCU space, we would interact on several occasions. I remember a few years ago at the NBR Summer Institute, actually, having dinner with Bill. We started talking about a potential project, and as it usually goes, we get back to our respective camps, and, everything goes back into the usual routine of things. And unfortunately, that did not materialize. On a subsequent panel at NSF, where we were both principal investigators, I then heard of his new project, which was on Black World War I veterans, which is the project that he has with Whitney Brown, Eddie Gray, and Agustin Antimbe. Apologies to any other co-authors that I may be missing there. And if you're not aware of that work, you should really check it out. They're doing great archival work and very interesting things there. And, of course, there are many other experiences we can share about Bill. I will leave it to others as we go on throughout this event. In the case of Rodney, if he were here, he could correct me. But if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I ever had a conversation with Rodney in person, even though I was a great admirer of him on social media. Those of you who followed him and saw him on Twitter, now X, know his screen name as Mots Justes, which in French means just words or true words. And I remember a few years ago when we were going through one of these particularly tumultuous times in this country, he put out a tweet in the spirit of, there are some things we cannot disagree about and still be friends. And when he put that out, it was just words that spoke true to my heart, because I always say that, but in a slightly different way. If you go through life and you don't make a few enemies, you've probably done something wrong, right? You've been too agreeable. At some point, you're going to step on somebody's toes. So with that being said, I want to hand it over to Nzinga Broussard, President-elect. I don't think I said who I was, but if you haven't realized, I'm Angelino Vicesa, President of the National Economic Association, Professor of Economics at Spelman. And Nzinga is going to walk us through the program. We have certain speakers lined up, and then an open session also for people to give some reflections. So Nzinga, please take it away.
Yes, I know there's a couple of things that we want to do. We want to listen to everyone talk about their time with these amazing economists. We also want to eat. So as you see in the program, we do want to allow some time for everyone to come up and say a few words, but we also want to be mindful of time. And so as you see, if you have some words that you want to speak on, whether as a mentor, if they served as a mentor, as a colleague, a co-author, or just a positive influence in your life, we do want you to come up and be able to share those words. So as the program states, we'll have Hazel come up here and give the invocation, and then the food will come out. And then we'll ask Amari Swinton and Trayvon Logan to share some reflections on the life and legacy of both Bill Spriggs and Rodney Andrews. And then we'll open it up for you all to come up and say your words and thoughts. Thank you. Hazel.
Thank you, Nzinga. Testing, okay. I don't know what happened. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we will bless the Lord at all times. His praises shall continually be in our mouths. We will look to the hills from whence comes our help, our strength, our fortitude. Our resources come from the Lord. Great is he that is in us than he that is in the world. If it had not been for the Lord on our side, where will we be? If it had not been for Bill Spriggs and Rodney Andrews on our side, being our friend, our colleague, our mentor, our benefactor, where would we be? Oh God, we come to celebrate the lives of two giants, Dr. William Spriggs and Dr. Rodney Andrews, who walked this earth. We are thankful for the time you loaned them to us. Oh, how blessed we were for our lives to intersect so that we could experience the essence of Bill and Rod. Oh God, they accomplished so much while they were here. They helped so many people while they were here. They inspired so many people while they were here. We know that it is not about the quantity of one's days here, but it's about the quality of our days. We know, Lord, that it is not about how long we live, but how well we lived. God, they have left a blueprint for us to follow and a legacy to live by. Give us the strength and the determination to continue their work in social and economic justice for our people. Our friends are now with our ancestors, and we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Bless this occasion, O Lord. Let us receive strength, encouragement, and yes, inspiration as we remember and recall lives well lived. Bless Bill and Rodney's families as they adjust their lives without their patriarch, their husband and sibling. Bless the National Economic Association as we adjust our agenda to fill the void left by these two accomplished economists. Let us glean from their lives some nuggets that will help us to continue the struggle for diversity, equality, and inclusion. Now, God, bless this food for nourishing our bodies. May it strengthen us for the journey that you have set before us and the task that you have assigned to us. Bless the hands that prepared this meal and bless the hands that are serving this meal. In your precious, wonderful name we pray. Amen.
So, good afternoon. My name is Omari Holmes Swinton. I'm the chair, director of graduate studies, and the director of the AEA summer program in the Department of Economics at Howard University. Could everybody who's an alumni of Howard or affiliated with Howard in some way please stand? I wouldn't have been at Howard without Bill, and a lot of people wouldn't have had the same experiences they had without Bill. So y'all could be seated. When I finished my PhD at Duke, like a lot of people go on the job market, I didn't get any jobs. It was two people who kind of looked out for me. Sandy offered me a postdoc so I could stay in North Carolina. And then Bill called me really late in April and said that he was interested in me coming to Howard. I didn't want to leave. I kind of wanted to stay in Durham. But my wife was like, well, we're not staying in Durham. So I ended up at Howard. And Bill supported me greatly early on in my career. Bill got invited to do a presentation in Ohio, and he sent me in his place, which was surprising to other people. But Bill always encouraged me and believed greatly in my research on HBCUs. One of my first publications is with Bill Spriggs and Greg Price, which just came out of a conversation. And then Bill left Howard, which was interesting for us at Howard, but he went to the Department of Labor. And we went over there to take the students to go visit him and talk to him. And he had such joy in the work that he was doing. And it amazed me because, I don't like working like that. So that sit with someone and them tell you that I work all day and I didn't realize 8 hours went by. When I'm at work, I like look at my watch constantly. So he was just excited to work in improving people's lives by helping them. So when Bill came back to Howard, I was extremely excited. I told him I had this great idea for an NSF grant, and he told me it wouldn't work, and he gave me another idea about exploring the path of blacks at HBCUs. He didn't just tell me what to do. He gave me the connections where I could get the data from the College Board, and he basically did put everything in place so we could get this grant. And so our grant, one of the main findings of our grant research was that black students are more likely to graduate if they attend an HBCU versus a PWI. So I became chair by accident because Howard had 2 failed chair searches, and then they eventually came back to me and asked me to be chair. And I had this really, really big dream of bringing the AEA summer program back to Howard that was started by Marcus Alexis. And before I actually pursued the idea, I had to talk to Bill, and he thought it was a great idea. So last year was the 3rd year of the program. And everybody who knows Bill was extremely busy. Like, he was always doing something, he was always somewhere. And even though he was busy, he sat down in that meeting when we made our decisions and went through the 100 and something applications to decide who was coming to the program. He would sit on the calls with us. And so the year before last was our first year in person because of COVID. And during the open ceremony, I asked Bill, you want to speak about Howard? And I was like, you can take 5 minutes or so because, we didn't know. Bill gave like a 30-minute love story on the value of Howard, the importance of it to this world, why students should love to be at Howard. And he even did the Howard chant, the HU, chant. And he did this off the top of his head. And it just amazed me about his love for DC and the love for his people that he showed in everything he did. So the last summer he fell ill the week before the program started. And so our past year students didn't get the opportunity to hear the passion he had for Howard or to meet Bill. And Bill's passion always came through because he always showed up. He's one of the few faculty members who I would see at graduation. He went to senior honors dinners, he went to faculty meetings, he went to departmental meetings, he came to job search meetings, he came to guest lectures. He was always there. And that's something that I take from him is even though he is who he was and he was as important as he was, he always made time for his main job because he loved Howard. Our department would never be the same without him. We had interviews this year and people talked about Bill during the interviews. And it was just, when we do interviews, we also have a script that is written by Bill that talks about why Howard is important. I speak on behalf of the faculty, students, and alumni of our department and university when I say he will be greatly missed and remembered. We recently started a scholarship in his name, and thanks to some donations from probably some people in the room, we're going to have the scholarship set up hopefully this spring. I'm working with Jennifer on getting that set up. But if you're interested in keeping his legacy alive, particularly at Howard, please consider donating to the scholarship that we have. So I'm going to talk briefly about Rodney. And I met Rodney in the summer of every time I say this, I feel old. But in the summer of 2001, when I was in the AEA summer program, he did the summer program the year before me, and he was at the Pipeline Conference. And he was like, oh, you could call me if you need information. And a couple of people told me that. And he's the only one I would call who actually answered the phone. And we would talk the whole time I was in graduate school. Anytime he came to Duke, because the summer program moved to Duke while I was at Duke, we would always talk. And he was always like a big brother to me because he was slightly ahead of me in school. And he always encouraged me and always read my work because I went to Duke. And Duke was Duke. And it wasn't many people I could talk to at Duke. And so Rodney was one of the few people that I could talk to. Rodney and I have always talked, and I went to Chicago to do a presentation about affirmative action, and I was on the panel with Peter Arcediaconou, who happened to be my advisor at Duke. And the person who helped me actually plan what I was going to say was Rodney. He sent me papers, then we went through my presentation, we went through everything. And he, you know, I miss Rodney because he was always there to help me with my work. And he was so friendly and so caring, and he was such a great person, and he took care of his family. And when you talked to him, you felt joy coming through the words that he said. So I just wanted to say that about Rodney as well. Thank you.
So I don't have notes because I think when you are talking about people who are really important to you, you should really speak from your heart. I'm Trevon Logan, NG Axiom Endowed Professor of Economics at Ohio State University, Associate Dean in the college. And I'm going to start with a brief story about Bill, who I always respected as an economic historian who really didn't get his due among economic historians and was always pushing me. But the secret side of Bill is his ability to be what I will call a behind-the-scenes gangster. And I came to know this because several years ago now, Jim Paterbo was trying to start the Race and Stratification Group at the MBER, and he was trying to get a meeting with me, and I was very busy. We finally got the meeting, and he said, "Sharon, I really want you to direct this group." And I said, "Absolutely not. I don't want to do it." And he said, "Well, if you don't do it, I'm going to have a problem with Bill Spriggs." And I don't know what Bill had told Jim, but he was absolutely desperate. And I'm very glad that I agreed to do it, and I am very grateful that Bill is the one who actually lit the fire under some of our very mainstream institutions to actually move into new directions that I think have been quite generative. And Bill has been very important in that regard. About Rodney, it's very difficult for me because I knew Rodney for more than 20 years when we were both graduate students, and before he had any gray hair at all, and certainly before his beard turned completely gray, when he had very young children and was just a graduate student at the University of Michigan, and I was at Berkeley, and I just immediately struck up a very genuine and unique bond with Rodney as friends, but also as economists. Rodney is the one who taught me all of the econometrics that I know. If you ever see me do anything other than OLS, you need to thank Rodney Andrews for that, because he really taught me all of that. The other thing that Rodney really taught me was that we need peer mentors. I'm a big advocate for mentoring, but the person who mentored me the most in this profession is actually Rodney. And we would joke in the last several years about becoming older in the profession and how we had looked up to older, we would call them old heads in the profession. I don't want to call any names. Pat Mason. No, I just Sandy Darity. But older people in the profession that we knew who had also been friends with each other from graduate school and from the very early parts of their career. And that is inspirational to young people to see that. And it began to dawn on Rodney and I that we were now filling that role for other young people, which made us realize, one, how old we were in the profession, but also that people were watching us, and that encouraged us to be very circumspect in how we carried ourselves in the profession. And I really learned that from Rodney. Rodney is really the one person who could keep me from cussing somebody out. And I regret that he's gone, because I'm just going to start cussing people right on out. Is anybody else to hold me back now? But the one thing that Rodney really taught me, and I always reflect on really strongly, is that Rodney understood that the profession is secondary to your life. And that lesson, I really do think people should take to heart. I want you to read Rodney's papers because he's absolutely brilliant, and certainly also as someone who didn't get the intellectual credit that he deserves. But Rodney would give all of that away to spend time with his spouse, to spend time with his children, to spend time with his grandchild. That is where his priorities lie. And so even upon hearing news of Rodney's death, I know that he did not sacrifice himself for this profession. And that's a lesson that I really, really think we should take to our hearts as we remember these great economists, that they are terrific and exceptional economists, but they did not sacrifice themselves for this profession because it absolutely is not worth it. And that's why I want to celebrate their lives outside of economics as much as we want to honor and reflect on their lives within economics. Thank you.
So as I said earlier, enjoy the lunch, and as you feel moved, please come up and share some thoughts, some memories, whatever you feel moved to share with the rest of us.
Good afternoon, friends. I am Bernard E. Anderson, Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, commonly known as the West Point of American capitalism. I was privileged to have the opportunity to speak at the memorial service that was held for Bill Spriggs at Howard University. I traveled to Howard from Philadelphia, arrived early, and when I read the program that I was presented with at Morgan, what is the name of that center, Amari, where they held the service? The big auditorium. Yes. I looked at the program and saw that my name was on the program. No one had contacted me to say that I would be asked to speak at the memorial service. And so while I greeted several other friends who attended there, including a dear friend of long standing, Amari's father, David Swinton, I jotted down some notes that I would share with the audience and began with the observation that being invited to speak at this event without notice made me feel like a mosquito in a nudist camp. There was so much there I hardly knew where to begin. But I thought that the best place to begin would be at the beginning. And that was when I met Bill Spriggs at these meetings. The year he graduated with a PhD degree from the University of Wisconsin. He attended the meeting. I forget which city he was in. He moved around the country. And he was very outgoing, and he was introducing himself to different people that he met. And when he introduced himself to me, I congratulated him on his success at the University of Wisconsin. He did his undergraduate work at Williams College, one of the few African Americans to be at that institution. And we learned that we had similar intellectual interests, both being labor economists. And I learned about his background, the fact that his father had been a Tuskegee Airman. That interested me greatly, having been and continue to be a member of the Board of Trustees of Tuskegee University. And we became close friends. I communicated frequently with Bill Spriggs. I must tell you that we did not always agree. Bill held his views very strongly. Most of the time he was right and I was wrong. But I took advantage of his knowledge and his insight into economics and his strong commitment to efforts to improve the economic status of African Americans, which is my principal interest also. And so in my brief period of comment here, I would like to share with you what I think are two major features of Bill Spriggs' career that should inspire and perhaps force other economists or encourage other economists to emulate. One was the diversity of his career. Bill rose to high levels in academia, Congress, the National Urban League, and the Department of Labor, and in the labor movement. He was the first, and I hope not the only, black head of chief economist of the AFL-CIO. That is hugely important. But while he was in that job, and I don't know where he ever found the time to do this, he remained a full professor at Howard University. What that tells us is that if you are committed to the economics profession and see the economics profession as a path to improving the economic status of black people, you can't do that spending all your time in academia. Be successful in academia. Get tenure wherever you are. Learn what is necessary to get tenure, but get out of academia into the real. Academia is not the real world, ladies and gentlemen. It is very restricted, very narrow, very suffocating in many ways, especially if you're in an institution like the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, where you have no other African American colleagues. I was treated very well at the Wharton School. I never taught more than one course a year. I had as much money for research as I wanted to have. I got tenure on time because of my research and publications on race and economics. Wasn't anybody else doing that? But a diversity of your career will take you far if you play it right. By the way, I want to thank Nina Banks for the brilliant research he did on Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander. Sadie Alexander was the first African American to earn a PhD in economics. She earned it at the University of Pennsylvania in 1921. I was the seventh African American to earn a PhD in economics at the University of Pennsylvania in 1969. In contrast to Sadie's experience, and her experience as brilliantly described in Nita's book, she could not get a job teaching economics, both because of her race and her gender. Neither, listen to this, my brethren and sisters, neither of the HBCUs in the Philadelphia area, Lincoln University and Cheney, would hire her to teach economics because she was a woman. She didn't want to go to the South to teach in an HBCU because she was dating Raymond Alexander, a prominent lawyer, graduate of the Wharton School and the Harvard Law School. So she, after 2 years working for the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, she returned to law school at Penn, became a lawyer, and pursued a career in law. When I graduated in '69, I was hired by the Wharton School and did not know that Sadie Alexander was the first black person to receive a degree to this end. But that's another story. The second lesson that I would hope you learn from Bill's career is the necessity to think out of the box about economic theory on race and economics. His New York Times article on that topic is absolutely brilliant and opened my eyes to many aspects regarding economic theory as it relates to the economic status of black people and how wrong the traditional economic theory is about that topic. This nonsense of what did Gary Becker wrote, the economics of discrimination, based on the taste. If you have a taste for tomatoes and fruit, what is this taste for discrimination? David Swinton wrote his dissertation at Harvard on that issue, but it never got anywhere. So Bill Spriggs has made a significant contribution to economics and guides black economists, or it should guide black economists, in the research that they will do on this topic. Now, I'm not saying that all black economists ought to concentrate on race and economics. I mean, if you love macroeconomics, do that. If you love microeconomics, do that. But if you want to make a real contribution, get out of that box and do what my dear friend William Sandy Darity and Kristen Mullen did in their classic book on reparations. That is what black economists should devote themselves to. While you're on this earth, you have an obligation to make a contribution to doing what is necessary to improve the economic status of black people. That is our charge to bear. I'm not a preacher. I was sent to a black college, at Livingstone College, Salisbury, North Carolina, with the expectation that I would be a preacher. But if God called me to preach, the line was busy and the phone was off the hook. So I thank you very much for coming here and honoring. I did not know Rodney Andrews, never met him, never had a conversation with him. But I did know William Spriggs, and that knowledge and experience had a tremendously positive impact on my life. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gordon-Nemhard. I too met Bill Spriggs here at my first NEA meeting in the late 1980s. Margaret Sims actually introduced me to him. She and Wallene kind of took me under wing, and Margaret was like, "Oh, you need to know Bill Spriggs," and she was right. I was just going through my mind over all the different things Bill and I were able to do since I met him. I guess the highlights are a couple things. My favorite of his articles is the Janus Face of Race. I don't know if you all know that one, that he did with the late Rhonda M. Williams. And when I was doing the special issue for the review on her, I asked him to write an article about being a co-author with Rhonda. And I also remember at her memorial at University of Maryland, he said, "Oh, Rhonda's the brains, I'm just the technician," which of course everybody knows is wrong, but that, that was his tribute to Rhonda. And so I remember that and that humbleness that Bill had, even though, as you see and as you've already heard, he's done and accomplished so much and been so much. Also, when I first moved to D.C., he and I actually started the D.C. Economic Club, which I don't know who remembers that, but we lasted about 5 years, I think. But when we finally realized no one had momentum to do any more with that organization, we actually had $700 in the bank, which I think we donated to the NEA because we couldn't figure out what to do with it. But I was really proud of us that we actually held programs and had a little bit of had some dues money and that kind of thing. So that was another aspect. Also, I don't think anyone's mentioned the Center on Race and Wealth that he started at Howard. I was actually the first summer program teacher for that project. And then he hired me as a visiting professor for a year when I was in between jobs. So another case of mentorship and taking us under wing and that kind of thing. So I just thought I would mention those things. EPI also, I guess, wasn't mentioned, but his work at the, what does EPI stand for? Economic Policy Institute, right. I also remember work there, and I also remember when he was at, one of the times he was at AFL-CIO, they had that whole project where they got black economists to talk about how to teach about economic inequality to labor people or something. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts. He will definitely be missed. It was a big shock to lose him at this stage. And thank you all for remembering him.
So my name is Marcus Casey. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm actually not that public a person, so if I'm doing this, this is probably I'm a little nervous. I don't like talking to lots of people except about economics. And so I'm going to start with my first memory of Bill Spriggs, okay? To Bernard's point, the first time I saw Bill Spriggs speak was at the AEA Summer Mentoring Program, okay, in the same year that I also first met Rodney in 2001, and Trevon, by the way. And I'll come to that in a second. And to his point, I saw an argument between an economist who was speaking, I won't say his name because it turns out he was wrong, and Bill Spriggs. And the economist was presenting. And Bill raised his hand and said to him, "I think you're wrong." What was it about? It was about an instrument, okay? And he said, "I think you're presenting the wrong conditions for an IV," okay? So we're all economists in here, and so you know you need two things, relevance and exclusion, right? And Bill articulated in that crowd, this was the first time I heard that. I was still an undergrad. So I was a junior in college, so I didn't know what an IV was, right? And the person, said, "No, Bill, you're wrong." And Bill said, "No, I think I'm correct on this." And the person then started to push Bill off, right? And it actually got a little heated. Okay, first, that was my first lesson in how economics can go down, right? But the thing that stood out to me, and it still stood out to me many years later when Bill and I had actually become, friends, at least associates. He was definitely a pro Howard, and as a Howard grad, it was sometimes jarring, so to speak, because he seemed more pro Howard than me sometimes. But I remember Bill stood his ground and said, "No, I think I'm right, and here's why." And, now with my knowledge, he didn't quite have the explanation right, but the fact that he stood his ground and he had the intuition for why this person, was wrong, and he wouldn't back down, always stuck with me. If you know you're right, you're right. And I didn't know why Bill was so strong in knowing that he was right. But to be honest, I realized that that's what you have to be. If you think you're right, stand on your own too. Stand on your opinion. Don't let anybody talk you down. And that was the first real lesson I learned about economics, and have stuck with me. Even to this day, I think about that from time to time. I'll talk about it. There's a friend of ours who couldn't come, Brad Hardy. And Brad and I talk about this, and I always recount this to him, because that was probably the most profound, experience within a seminar, even to this day. Seems minor, but this idea of standing your ground and not backing down, even when somebody tries to browbeat you and get angry with you, is probably to your best. And to a fault, I'm probably like that myself, because that was one of the first lessons that ingrained in me. And you can be that. Even as a black economist, sometimes in some of the rooms where people try to really browbeat you don't back down, okay? And so that was the thing. Lots of people have already said a lot of nice things about Bill and all the other things, so I don't have to recount that. But I want you to hold on to that anecdote, because that was the thing that really stuck me and made me immensely respect Bill, even before I knew what he was really talking about, okay? And so, Bill stuck to his convictions and that's what I try to aspire to, even to this day, as an economist. Now, Rodney, it's difficult for me to talk about this, but Rodney, for lack of a better phrase, he was my guy. So Rodney wasn't the type to necessarily call you every day, okay? But when he did call you, and he would call me regularly, it wasn't to talk shop. I get lots of people who contact me to talk shop, or they want me to do something for them or with them or something like that. Rodney was the only person in this profession that I knew, and I met Rodney and Trevon. I remember that night when I met them, when they were still graduate students. I was an undergrad, and I was talking to them, and it was the conversation about what graduate school was like. And, Rodney used to chide me, even to right before he passed away, about my, how naive I was about the profession when talking to them. And Trevon probably remembers what we were talking about. Because Rodney still laughed at me. I remember when you used to say crazy. I was an undergrad, right? I didn't know any better. But nevertheless, it was talking to Rodney and Trevon that night that made me decide that I was actually going to go to graduate school, okay? Because I wasn't sure. I was in the AEA summer program. Thought it was interesting. I wanted to become a lawyer. But it was talking to them and seeing them, and Rodney in particular, who's, was very, welcoming and saying, look, you can do this, but you got to think about this. And so when Trevon mentioned that peer mentorship, that's real. Because, it was talking to him and Trevon that really convinced me, yeah, this is something where I can actually do this. And over the course of my career, whether it's through graduate school, as an assistant professor, and now as an associate professor, you know, Rodney would reach out, and he would not ask, the first question wasn't about that paper, or, you know, are you going to this conference? Or first thing he would ask is, how you doing, Brother Casey? And to me, that's really telling, because even amongst, you know, the people who I'm closest to in the profession, often the first thing, are you working on that? Are you doing that? Are you this and that? But he would always say, how's it going, Brother Casey? How's your family? And we both had daughters later, and he would give me counsel on, you know, what you have to deal with daughters versus, you know, sons and things like that. But we would always talk for a long time about those aspects before we even got to the professional. And then, you know, of course, he gave me a lot of good advice professionally as well. You know, talked me out of a lot of bad decisions. You know, we could talk about aspects of different research papers. You know, Rodney was brilliant, and he knew his stuff, even if he wasn't always vocal about it. And so he was always somebody I could bounce that stuff off too, in addition to that life stuff. So, you know, and I miss his call. You know, I was thinking about, you know, the recent college football results. And I was thinking about, man, and it popped in my head. I wonder what Rodney would think about that before I realized. Because that was something that we often talked about, too. He was a complete person, and he was a complete person when he talked to you. It wasn't just about the profession. It wasn't just about, you know, what your latest paper was. But it also wasn't just about, you know, your family either, right? Because he knew that whole 360 part. That's what, you know, sort of determines your life. You need to mix the personal and the professional. And so if that's the one thing I'm going to miss most about Rodney, is being able to talk about that 360, you know, to be able to discuss certain aspects of your life and, you know, or what sort of decisions you have with no shame, because he always listened. And so, anyway, I just want to say, you know, like I said, Rodney was my guy. We talked a lot. You know, he was, you know, he gave me a lot of good advice. We've had a lot of arguments, right, because I stand on my convictions, but it was never any ill will, and I'm going to miss him greatly. I mean, I mean, he comes up all the time, you know, in some of my conversations, and, you know, it's just, you know, unfortunately, you know, that's a tough aspect of life, but I want you to, if you're going to take away anything about Rodney, for me, my experiences with him, is that he did represent kind of that 360 degrees person. And he was an important person in my life, and I'm going to miss him greatly.
Grateful for this community, the National Economic Association, to provide this space to honor these two giants. I hope we don't have to do it too often. I hope we don't have to do this annually and that more come, because it's hard, it's deeply saddening, and these are big losses. I'm going to say more about Rodney than Bill, because some other comments have already been made, and Rodney is more of my contemporary. So I'll start with Bill and just say, to echo everything that people have already said, Bill was everything right about humanity. Dedicated, earnest, and grounded with integrity to make the world a better place. Many of us disagreed with Bill. He is strong, a strong personality, but that core made it easy to engage with him whether you agreed or disagreed, and never questioned. He will and is among that pantheon in developing and advancing black economic thought. and black economic thought leaders. So rest in power, Bill. Let me turn to Rodney. Now, we did some of this at the Southern Economic Association, so I'm going to be repetitive somewhat. But, one other thing to announce about Bill, the President of the United States issued a declaration when Bill died, and it was eloquent. It's a beautiful declaration, and as Bernie was describing, influence, he was everywhere. That's another factor. You'd see, we were talking at the beginning of this conference that Bill showed up. He showed up everywhere. He showed up at, my understanding is, dissertations of people with whom he was not on the committee and stayed for the discussion. Be asked that you have to leave the room, but he wouldn't leave. So Rodney and I met. I grew up professionally with Rodney. I met in 1999 in another community, the University of Michigan community, for which Sheldon Danziger had a lot to do with, where he was a student at Michigan and Sheldon was his advisor, and I was one of the postdocs sponsored by University of Michigan. That program fostered a family relationship. And similar to a lot of the people in NEA, there were particular individuals that invested in that family background, that nurturing, that humanity. Barb Ramsey was one of them. She was the administrative person in there, and she would have us come back to her house and everything, and that's where you got to know Rodney well beyond his academic brilliance, but him as a person. So more than colleagues, it was a brotherhood. He was formative for that environment, and he was formative for the NEA environment. We were early adults, and these were the developmental years. I know we're both grateful for all those life lessons, those fond memories, and the generosity and mentorship that people provided for us. A key ingredient in all those memories is Rodney, his presence, his care, his pearls of wisdom. He would, with an awe-shocked expression, deliver insightful pearls of wisdoms that would always last. Even if subtle, he never just blended in. His presence was always there. You can close your eyes and see his affectionate laugh, affectionate smile, and lioness laughter, his roarish laughter. But what is ironic and even iconic, you could see Rodney outside of a podium, but when he got to the podium, his whole demeanor would change. When he got behind the podium, when presenting his work, it was all buttoned up and professional. His eloquent vocabulary, the serious demeanor, that would all beam behind his smile. In terms of scholarship, he was brilliant. I'm going to say a little bit about his scholarship. His commitment to justice, integrity, and pursuit of truth, unsurpassed. His work was impactful, socially relevant, and technically sound. He's one of the best econometricians I knew. I think that's probably true for many of us in here. If we had an econometric question, we could turn to Rodney. His innovation was ahead of its time. His analysis on the evaluation of the Kalamazoo Primus, which offered tuition and mandatory fee-free public college to students graduating from a public Kalamazoo high school, far preempted the 2016 and 2020 presidential platforms that many Democratic presidential candidates put forth offering tuition-free public education. His work with Amari Swinton, who we heard from earlier, of the Texas Public College and University's Top 10% Rule, which is a race-neutral alternative to race-based affirmative action that offered the automatic admittance to any Texas public college and university student that was in the top 10%. They pointed out some of the unintended and perverse incentives from cohorts of white Texas college high school students to strategically enroll in black predominant high schools to game the top 10% rule and enhance their chances for admissions into the Texas state flagship university. So, essentially, the work is prophetic in understanding the limitations and gentrifying, enhancing perversions associated with place-based and class-linked strategies to redress racial inequality, and it's really relevant, particularly in the wake of the Supreme Court justice ruling that struck affirmative action from law. The so-called gentrifying effects of this program tells us something about things like opportunity zones. Programs and policies that offer public incentives and programs aimed at enticing capital into low-income and racially segregated neighborhoods rather than empowering the people in those neighborhoods in the first place, well, it's going to have gentrifying effects that aren't going to yield the results that are so-called intended. Also, Rodney directed a major research infrastructure, the Texas School Project. It's perhaps the most comprehensive and potent data to trace and understand the trajectories of students in Texas from grade school all the way through college. So as colleagues, both Rodney and Bill were essentially universally beloved. Rodney respected his professional elders with a keen interest to learn and carry legacy. He engaged with his junior colleagues in a non-paternalistic respect and genuine desire to pass on information, guidance, and overall mentorship. Rodney was kind. He was hilarious. He had a big smile and a boisterous laugh. He was a righteous husband, father, and friend. I spent a lot of time in my life with Rodney and literally cannot recall an instance of him ever being spiteful, scornful, and frankly negative, offering a negative word about anyone. I can't say that I'm that righteous. I wish I could be. I strive for it. With both Rodney and Bill, we lost authentic, phenomenal scholars and overall human beings. I will miss them, I love them, and I'm lucky to have learned from them.
I want to thank the National Economic Association for allowing us the space to celebrate the life and legacy of these two fine gentlemen. This is obviously a very difficult time, and I know we're here to celebrate, and so it's been very delightful and affirming to hear about all the memories we have. I would certainly say with Dr. Rodney Andrews, Derek, you kept talking about his smile and his laugh, and that's what I have in the back of my mind as well. At the Southern Economic Association, I had a few more detailed remarks about Rodney. I first met him, it had been one of the summer mentoring pipeline conferences, I think probably more than 20 years ago, so those conferences have certainly played a big role in terms of bringing people together. I will say he was a man of integrity. He really did believe in diversifying the economics profession and diversifying the economy in terms of who gains, who wins and loses in terms of our economic progress and economic growth. He believed in diversifying the economics profession as essentially being God's work. I had heard him describe it as such, and I just think that should not be lost as well, that he was a brilliant scholar, a very fine gentleman, and I'm very pleased and proud and privileged to have had him in my life. In terms of Dr. Bill Spriggs, I can't recall when I first met him. It was probably at one of these ASSA meetings, maybe mid to late 90s, quite some time back. I really did take delight in what how Omari described him as somebody who showed up. I was always amazed that regardless of what he was invited to, or speaking of the summer mentoring pipeline conferences, he was always there. He always made time, despite the fact he was so busy. And I agree. I don't know how he found time to be at the chief economist at the AFL-CIO while still having his position at Howard University. I considered Bill to be a great friend and a great mentor, and certainly it's a big loss to me personally. I think it's a big loss not just to the National Economic Association, not just a big loss to the American Society of Hispanic Economists, for which he was a big proponent. It's a big loss to our economics profession, but it's a big loss to our country. And so I think it was very fitting that the President of the United States issued such a fine proclamation to recognize and honor the life and work of Bill. Both gentlemen will certainly be missed. I had a very hard time at the mentoring conference this summer because always in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, well, I get to go to the conference, and one person I know who's going to be there, I can catch up with, is going to be Bill Spriggs. And so that it will take quite some time to fill the void. And I don't think we'll fill the void as a profession or as a country for the loss of these fine gentlemen. But again, they have left such a wonderful legacy, and they both have truly made a difference in terms of pushing the needle for this profession, how we can continue to diversify. Lots and lots of work still needs to be done, and I know sometimes we can get a little discouraged that we've done all this work and yet so much more work remains. But know that we have made a difference. We've continued to push the needle, and we will not back down. So thank you.
There have been so many eloquent testimonies about Rodney and Bill that I'm going to speak very, very briefly. One of the things that's a feature of the economics profession is a long history of characterizing the inequalities that exist between marginalized communities and dominant communities as being the consequence of dysfunctional behavior on the part of the marginalized communities. And one of the things that I think was a signal contribution that both Rodney and Bill made was to continuously challenge those points of view, but also to say that we need to introduce other frameworks or other approaches to thinking about these issues and not simply react to the negative perspectives that dominate the profession's approach to thinking about inequality between groups. I would also like to add that, as Derek pointed out, Rodney was a remarkable technician, and I have tremendous admiration for his work, but I also have really fond memories of just sitting with him and telling wild stories and joking and not talking about economics at all. And so he's going to be missed in that part of my life. I'd also like to mention Bill as being somebody who was really significant in not believing that there should be any separation between scholarship and policy activism. In fact, I think that that's one of the most important attributes of Bill's perspective. And I'd like to mention one project that Bill undertook many years ago, I guess it's probably in the 1980s, that I thought was very significant in the moment. There were a series of economists who were arguing that if you could use the Armed Forces qualifying test scores as a measure of cognitive ability, you would eliminate any evidence of discrimination in labor markets. And I remember distinctly that it was Bill Spriggs with Bill Rogers who took that argument on full force. And I think that if anybody wants to go back and look at the history of thinking about discrimination in labor markets, that's a vital area for consideration and for memory. A few months ago, we gave Bill a posthumous award from the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center on Social Equity. And it's an award that I'm really, really proud of us having delivered, and I wish we had had the opportunity to give it to him while he was still living. One last person I'd like to mention who's been a connector in this process, who I don't think people have said anything about, is the other Rhonda, because Rhonda Williams has been mentioned, but Rhonda Sharp. who played a very, very important role in the AEA summer program in bringing all of these individuals together over time. It's been a remarkable community. There are black economists who have taken the dysfunctional position. I'm not going to name names at the moment, but I will say they have typically not been members of the NEA community. And so I think that the mission that Bernard Anderson talked about, the mission of making the circumstances and lives of black people, not just in the United States, but throughout the world better, is the mission of the NEA. And there are economists, black and white, who do not necessarily subscribe to that mission. But I'm so glad that Rodney Andrews and Bill Spriggs did.
I'm going to speak on Dr. Spriggs. He was a giant who walked among us. He was our chairman, leader, professor, administrator, mentor, supporter, and friend. He was a gentle wind that gave us a push in the back. He was a ray of sunshine who gave us hope and made us smile. Yet he was also determined, fierce, and focused. Once he made up his mind about something, he was committed to seeing it through. Dr. Spriggs came to Howard University in 2005 as our chairman. The Howard University Economics Department Alumni Association was instrumental in securing his appointment, as we thought he was the best person for the job. We were elated when the announcement was made and promptly had a welcome to Howard University and the Department of Economics reception for him. I could talk about how determined Bill could be. I could talk about how he brought in world-class economists to speak at our ODE annual spring dinner lecture. I could talk about how he was the catalyst for the Graduate Travel Award that Hooter, the alumni group, sponsors because he encouraged us to help a student or help students financially to travel to this conference, these meetings. I could talk about how he was a mover and a shaker at Howard University. But I want to talk about how he convinced me, Hazel Robinson, to become a member of this fine organization and also to become an officer of this organization. I can vaguely recall meeting and talking with Bill at an AEA welcome reception. At that reception, he asked me to become the treasurer of the NEA. I had not given it any thought. In fact, it was not even on my radar. But I wanted to serve, and then I said yes. And so I have been serving ever since. Bill had a way of persuading you, and he always have had a way of pushing you. I am thankful that he asked me to be treasurer and supported me over the years. I knew Bill had been sick for a long time, but it looked like he was coming along. In fact, about 2 weeks before his transition, he attended our department's graduates reception, and he looked fine to me. But I think we should be like Bill, push on, put on our best face no matter our personal discomfort, and also to remember our purpose. Bill loved interacting with students, molding and guiding them, and most importantly, helping him. As we say goodbye to Bill and remember what he meant to us personally and to the NEA professionally, let us continue to live out his legacy as we pursue, press, push, prod, protect, and promote our purpose to promote the professional lives of minorities within the economics profession and to study and research economic issues that are pertinent to our people. Goodbye, Bill.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie A. Cunningham, an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. I didn't want Marcus to be the youngest person to say something about these two individuals, typically following behind Marcus in some way, fashion, or form. I'm going to first say something about Bill, and then I'm going to finish up talking about Rodney. I have a long-standing kind of quarrel with Howard, mainly because I never got a job there. And I remember when I first met Bill, it was at the AAA meetings right after I was in the market. And the previous market, one of my colleagues got an offer from Howard. And so when I saw him, he was like, "Where are you at?" I'm like, "At Portland State." He said, "You should reach out to me so we can hire you. We think we have a job at Howard." And I haven't heard anything since. But I was always amazed by how much Bill knew. And this is typical of all of the black economists of that generation, how much work that they did, mainly due to the barriers that they had to overcome. Every time I would see presentations like, "Where's Bill at?" Because I know he has his comment. He's going to ask a question, and he's probably already going to know the answer. I've seen him pull people that will eventually get papers published in relatively high-ranking journals and say, "Yeah, I worked on that 20 years ago, and I got that answer already." We kind of knew that, and I think that was just his way to make sure he got cited. But Bill was a phenomenal person and a phenomenal scholar, and those are big shoes to fill. I know Howard would miss them. As it relates to Rodney, the first black economist I met was Trayvon. I think Trayvon was unpacking from Berkeley to Ohio State, and we had a nice short conversation. It was not mean, but I will save that story for later. It's one day when we're honoring you. And why you're still alive. The second black economist who was not necessarily an economist next is actually Nzinga. Nzinga is one of the reasons why I went to the University of Michigan and how I found out about Rodney. I was coming in, she was leaving, she was telling me about all the black economists that came from the University of Michigan. Michigan is known for producing black economists, somewhat better than Berkeley, somewhat more proficient at producing black economists than some other places as well. And so I knew about Rodney and Rucker and others. And so I did not meet Rodney until later. After my first year, Sheldon Danziger hired me as a summer RA to work on affirmative action. I did not go to University of Michigan to do work on affirmative action. I did not go to University of Michigan to do stuff on education. I'm finally doing my first paper that's somewhat related to education that Rodney knew about before his passing. But in order to do this lit review on affirmative action, he put me in contact with Rodney, and Rodney says, "This is your literature review. Read these papers, and by the end of the summer, you will have what you need from Sheldon." And ever since then, that kind of set me on a course as a scholar, as far as providing me a research agenda, ways to go about doing my job. From that literature review on affirmative action, it actually led to my job market paper, which has nothing to do with education, has nothing to do with affirmative action, but I'm reading about all these affirmative action litigation cases. It led to my advisor saying, "You're doing all this work on all this reading on litigation and affirmative action. Here's a war on poverty program that might have something to do with this." They didn't, but it led to this paper on a legal service program. When I finished at University of Michigan, I have a job market paper, The Impact of Legal Services on Crime Studying the 1960s, something like that. It's a good paper. Wasn't written that great at the time. Rodney seen the paper. I had got my first job at Portland State University. I don't know, Greg Price is not here, but every other day Greg Price is putting out which institutions did not hire black economists. And I'm a black PhD, black man from a top-ranking institution, and I'm at Portland State, which is a really good place, but I felt like I wasn't contributing to dealing with this inequity as it relates to working at one of these institutions. And Rodney would say, you don't worry about that. You're doing your research, right? That's what matters. You have a good paper. That's your job market paper. And you also have another paper that's really good. So just keep doing your work. So when it comes to trying to get that paper published, he put me in contact with the economist that got in contact with me to help me get that paper published. Right, and that paper was published in the Journal of Urban Economics, so that wouldn't have been done without him. When I got to Portland State, I had to teach labor economics. He gave me his notes, gave me his tests, gave me his quizzes and the lecture notes, and said, "You don't change anything but the name." Right, and so I basically taught that class using all his material. I didn't change anything on the questions or whatnot. I've moved several times from being at Portland State to going to the University of Memphis, to going to Cornell, to going to UT at Austin. Every one of those moves, he played a role in. In 2 of those moves, he played a big role in. I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for Rodney. He helped me get my papers published. He helped set a course as far as a research agenda. He helped put money in my pockets, and there's no way I could be up here and not say something about Rodney. From my career, I'm extremely grateful to him. My family is extremely grateful to him. I miss him dearly, and as a graduate from the University of Michigan, for all of those future scholars that are in the room, he was a delight. He was a champion of black economists. He always knew who was coming out, what they were working on, and that's just something to miss. It's somewhat can be challenging, right, being an economist and presenting and trying to sell these papers, and Rodney's never said anything negative about my work. It was always positive. You're doing great things. This paper is going to go in that journal if you do this. And the last thing that I would say, for me, he was a big brother. He was a mentor. I got to follow him around the ASSA meeting one time. He doesn't come to these meetings often, but one time when he came, he let me just follow and watch him navigate a room. And he knew everybody. People will stop what they were doing to shake his hand, to talk to him, see what he was doing, and he knew what they were doing. And I was just like, wow, how does he know all of these people? And then when I went to his service, when he's passed, and I saw how many lives he touched, and I was like, wow. I'm just thinking, like, he touched my life, like he helped me, but he touched a lot of individual lives. And so when I talk to people and they ask me questions about the profession and they ask me things about career and I tell them things and they say, how do you know? I'm really just telling you what he told me. And so one of the things that I think is important for us to do is to always give back and to mentor young scholars. So I'm very appreciative of Rodney, and we'll miss you.
Hi, Patrick Mason, and I really didn't expect to say anything, but just sitting there and I said, well, it'll be kind of robbery to not say something. I knew both Rodney and Bill, obviously Bill for much longer, and I don't have a whole lot to add to what people have already said. I mean, I'm not quite sure where I first met Rodney. It may have been on the campus of the University of Michigan or maybe at the summer conference. I went to Michigan before going to the new school, so I tended to keep in contact with folks at the University of Michigan. But as has already been said, Rodney would talk about things other than economics, and Rodney was a football guy, so I talked with him about that. But I think our longest conversation was about Lifetime television. Because his wife was watching Lifetime, and he told me how much he hated Lifetime. I said, yeah, man, my wife watching Lifetime too, and I just hate it. And so we spent about 30 minutes talking about how much we hated Lifetime, but, you know, wife got the remote. So what you gonna do? And Rodney, yeah, he's a very bright guy, and very charming guy, easy smile, easy to get along with. He didn't feel it necessary to prove to you how smart he was. I mean, he knew he was smart, so he didn't have to prove it to you. And I always liked that about him. And I'm not quite sure where I first met Bill either. It was sometime in the 80s. So Bill Spriggs and Rhonda Williams and I were kind of same cohort. So it's like, wow, that's a good group of people to kind of be in the same bracket with. I mean, Bill, outstanding person. Now, Bill could also, I learned a lot of economics from Bill. And, probably in my book I have a lot of stuff from Bill, and there may not be a citation, so hope somebody don't look at that and say, he stole that from Spriggs. Yes, I did. So he's getting the cite now. But Bill, I learned a lot of, so Rodney and my sport, Rodney's sport, football, Sandy, Derek, they're like college basketball guys. But Bill was old school. He liked baseball, right? And I learned a lot about baseball from Bill, but of course Bill couldn't just talk about statistics and that kind of thing. He had to tell you the difference between the Negro Leagues and the major leagues. And that example always stayed with me as an example of technological change. Because Bill said the Negro League, it wasn't just difference in skin color, it was a different way of playing the game. It was what's now called small ball. And the objective was to get on base and to steal a base and eventually score a run and take home, versus Major League Baseball was power game, hitting the ball across the fence. I use that example a lot, like I know what I'm talking about. This Bill Spriggs example, I know Bill was right because Bill said it. So I just use that and let people think that I know what I'm talking about. I just have to have a good memory for what Bill was talking about. But Bill, as said, Bill he did a lot of interesting things with Congress, with academics, with the Labor Department, with AFL-CIO. And Bill was always a person that I could shoot an email to and just, get a response on some issue that I was thinking about, or sometimes I get an email from him. And he was a wonderful person, excellent economic historian, really good at econometrics. Bill just was an all-around, I think, wonderful person. And for me, it was that was a tough moment. I think it was Rhonda Sharp who notified me that he passed. And that'll be a moment that stay with me for a very long time, because as Derek said earlier, he was, I think Derek's words were the best of humanity. And that's true. Bill was just a wonderful human being, in addition to being an outstanding scholar and friend. And definitely miss him. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you all. We're going to wrap things up. We know there's another session that starts at 2:30, so we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to get to it. I didn't plan on saying anything. I just saw my role as bringing us all together and allowing us to say a few words about these two amazing economists. But I'm going to say a little bit about both. I didn't know Bill that well, but I did a number of activities with Howard, or ran into him a couple of times. I just want to say this about Bill. I'm not in academia. I use my skills as an economist outside of academia. And what that means is that it can be a little intimidating being around all you professors that like to talk about the contribution that you're having in this space. And so I tend to, stay in the back a little bit and, just listen. But I never felt intimidated around Bill. Right? And I wish I had taken advantage of getting to know him better, to have a conversation with him, to be able to capitalize on his knowledge. And so it was a flaw in me not being able to, every time I came across him, I wanted to interact with him. I wanted to talk to him more, just didn't know how to. But he seemed very, very welcoming. And I think a number of us, I'm probably not junior anymore, but a number of you junior economists have probably felt that around him. And hopefully there's other economists in this room that you feel very comfortable around. And all I can say is please seize that moment, pull them aside, talk to them, learn from them while you can. Rodney and I went to Michigan together a long time ago. And so after we both graduated, we would only really stay in touch when we'd come to these conferences together. But it's, whenever I look at this picture, any picture with Rodney in the suit, it puts a smile on my face because that's not how I remember him. And Rodney was just so cool. And what I can say is that it really does help to not be the only one in a PhD program. Rodney was just that presence, the only black person in a PhD program. He was just a presence, right? We all know how difficult it can be, trying to get through a PhD program, and oftentimes you want to give up. But whenever I would get together with Rodney, we didn't necessarily talk about our classes. We didn't talk about our research. We just chilled and we could relate, right? And that meant a lot, and I do wish that I had stayed in touch with him more. So those are my 2 cents. As I said, I didn't plan on saying anything. I just wanted to make sure that you all had the opportunity to talk about how great these 2 individuals are. And so as we wrap up, please continue the conversations, right? Let's keep talking about the influence that they've had in our lives for the rest of the conference. And, I just also want to make everyone aware of the flyer that we put out there for the call of papers on access, equity, and education, a conference in honor of Rodney Andrews. If you have any questions, Trayvon would be able to answer them. If you need additional flyers, let me know. We can also email them to you. But the conference itself is May 31st and June 1st, and they will be accepting papers through February 9th. Hopefully that's in on the flyer. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you everyone who shared words. Thank you.